This story, entitled Not Quite Dead, tries to imagine what might happen in the near future in terms of brain research. I still recall what happened to me after my accident, even though it's now quite a number of years ago. Of the accident itself, I remember nothing, but I was able to piece together much of the story afterwards by listening to people around me. I think it might have been on the second day that I regained a semblance of consciousness, meaning that I could hear what was going on. Of course, that was the extent of it. I could hear and process mentally what I heard, but I could not move at all, even to the extent of being able to twitch my eyelids voluntarily. Whether it was late in the day, I do not know, but the room in the intensive care unit did not have windows. Everything felt very strange, but I could not move to see why. However, as the fog began to lift, I was able to deduce that I must have been connected to a life support apparatus. I'd seen such a system before when my father was in his last illness. A ventilator with a tube down the patient's throat and a clear plastic mask over the nose and mouth, intravenous fluids to maintain blood pressure, and sensors to allow vital signs to be recorded: blood pressure, heart rate, respiration, oxygenation, and so on. From time to time I heard voices that I recognized, my mother's and my fiance's, and many that I did not, which I suppose must have been those of the hospital staff. At one point, the conversation grew quite animated. A male voice, which could only have been that of a doctor, was saying that I appeared to be in a persistent vegetative state. The doctor explained to my mother and my fiancé that this meant that although my heart was still beating, I appeared what appeared to be, in layman's terms, is called brain dead, and that there was little or no prospect that I would ever regain consciousness. Tests, he said, had been done. He was very gentle but quite uncompromising in his explanation. Michael, he said, presumably to my mother, is unreceptive and unresponsive. When we attempted to stimulate him, he did not respond by any movement or by making any sound. There was also no response when we shone a light into his eyes or poured ice-cold water into his ears. Michael simply cannot respond even in these involuntary ways. He also cannot breathe on his own. If we were to turn the ventilator off, he would stop breathing. I'm really sorry to have to tell you this, but Michael is brain dead and there is no hope of any recovery. At this point, another voice, a rather self-assured female voice, took over. I'm sorry to bring up this subject at such a difficult moment, she said, but there's something that I have to ask you. Since Michael has unfortunately suffered such a serious injury that he will not be able to recover, I wonder if you would consider whether he might give the gift of life to others. Perhaps out of his tragedy it might be a small consolation to you that the end of his life might make life possible for other people. Perhaps, she added, Michael has already signed the organ donor card on the back of his driver's license. Whether he has or hasn't, it's always up to the family to give their permission for organ recovery. So I'd like to ask you whether you would give such permission so that Michael's death might be a gift to other people. I could hear my mother sobbing uncontrollably as she was faced with a decision that no one ought ever to have to confront. To take the organs out of her only son, give them to some other person or persons unknown. Was I really dead, she'd be asking herself? I would not have looked dead, because with the aid of the ventilator, I would have seemed to be breathing normally, with my skin perfused with oxygen to a nice healthy pink. A sense of dread came over me. This presentation by the doctor and the organ retrieval person was clearly designed to elicit only a single answer: to go ahead, in the way that a damaged car is the records can be harvested for parts. I'm giving a few minutes to think this over, continued the assertive voice, but time is important if Michael's organs are to be given to someone else. My reprieve came at the hands of my fiancée, who is herself a nurse. "Thank you, Doctor," she said, "for explaining Michael's situation so clearly. We really appreciate you having taken so much time with us. But there is one point that I don't quite get straight. When you say that Michael is brain dead, do you mean there's no activity in his brain at all? And if that's the case, why does his heart continue to beat?" "Well, it's nothing more than a kind of automatic reflex," interrupted the assertive voice quite quickly. "It doesn't indicate there's any real brain activity or awareness." My fiancée shot back, "Doctor, is that really true, that there is no brain activity, even though Michael's heart is still beating, and it's some sort of reflex?" "Well, I might not actually call it a reflex," responded the doctor. "There are different parts of the brain. When we say that someone's brain dead, we mean that they have lost all the parts of the brain that are associated with cognition and with the ability to control movements and so on. There has been irreversible damage at the top end of what we call the brain stem. To use the analogy of a computer, it would be like having a hard drive that cannot connect to any output device like a screen or a printer." "So you mean that Michael might actually be able to think inside this brain of his, but not to communicate his thoughts?" "Well, I don't know I'd go quite that far," said the doctor. "But that might be the case, mightn't it? Isn't that what you're saying? I really think we should have more tests done before we can agree to any organ transplants. Don't you think so, Mother?" "Oh, I really don't know, dear," replied the voice of my mother. "You know so much more about these things than I do. But if you say so." "Doctor," said my fiancée now much more vigorously, "this is a teaching and research hospital. I'm absolutely sure that you must have a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine here. I insist that before we give any permission for Michael's organs to be harvested, we make sure that he really isn't aware of what's happening to him, even if he cannot communicate with us." "Well, okay, I'll see what I can do," said the doctor, though rather uncertainly. "No, let me be 100% clear on this. I want my fiancé to be tested for whether he really is brain dead before I or his mother are prepared to give you any permission to cut him open to retrieve his organs. We'll wait in the lounge and you can let us know when you've made the arrangements." There was then the sound of footsteps and a door opening and closing. Then the self-assertive voice said angrily, "You stupid, stupid idiot. So this beating heart cadaver," she used the expression BHC, "is like a computer whose only problem is it can't be connected to the printer. Great. So what he needs is a new printer cable. That's what you just told them. What chance do you think there is now that they'll give permission to retrieve his organs? I have already contacted the organ procurement organisation to tell them that we have a probable BHC. What are they going to say when they hear about this screw-up, you moron?" More footsteps, this time the sound of a door slamming. Several hours later, I was taken to the basement where, I then discovered, the functional MRI machine was located. The doctor and the assertive voice person were both present, in addition to technicians. The instrument was noisy, and I was surrounded by it. But when I emerged, I could hear snatches of conversation. The assertive voice said, "So is he completely flatlined then, brain-wise?" The technician answered, "No, there's definite brain activity." "But what part of the brain? Does it mean anything? Is it just a reflex?" "Sorry, I'm just the lab tech." Then there was a pause. Then the doctor said, "After this, I don't see how we can possibly tell the family that there is no brain activity." The assertive voice said, "But that's not the same as saying that he's alive." To which the doctor replied, "But it sure isn't the same as saying he's definitely dead." The assertive voice said then, "Do you want to be the one who gives the say-so for keeping him on life support forever?" The doctor replied, "Do you want to be the one who gets hit for malpractice for cutting up a brain-alive person and harvesting the parts?" "I don't think there's any reason to use that kind of language about organ donation," replied the assertive voice. The term is recovery or retrieval, not harvesting. You've forgotten we're both supposed to be in the business of saving lives. Doctor replied, this one's my call. I'm telling the family that there's some brain activity, but we don't know what that means. That happens to be the truth. They can then make their own decision. Do what you like then, you idiot. Just remember the people who are waiting for hearts, lungs and kidneys when your BHC ties up a bed in the ICU forever. My luck held in two ways. Firstly, and not surprisingly, my fiancé persuaded my mother to refuse permission for organ donation once the doctor had told them about the brain activity. As the assertive voice had said, that could have left me in the limbo of ICU with minimal treatment, with the staff just waiting for me to die to free up the bed. But the other stroke of luck I had was that the doctor had a friend and colleague whose name was Dr. Mark Bowen, whose specialty was and is communication with people in a vegetative state. I was transferred from the ICU in the regular part of the hospital to a special room in the research wing. Dr. Bowen had access to his own functional MRI machine that he used in his personal research. Because he talked to me all the time on the assumption that I could hear him, I soon learned that his research program involved methods of communicating with people in my situation. He'd already used a clever technique to make this sort of contact. As he told me, different parts of the brain respond to different stimuli. In his research, he had trained a few patients to answer simple questions with yes or no in the following way. Think of something pleasant if you want to give yes as your answer. Say playing a game of tennis with a friend. Then think of something unpleasant if you want to answer no, like finding a worm in your salad. Different areas of your brain should become active for the nice and nasty thoughts. I'll put you in the functional MRI machine and then ask you a question. All you have to do is think of the tennis game for yes and the worm salad and the salad for no, and I'll look at which part of your brain responds, or lights up, as we say in our business. Of course, I could not indicate whether I'd understood him. So Dr. Bowen repeated his strategy several times over the next few days. Then it was time for a trial run. First, he said, I'm going to have to put a kind of helmet on your head. It has a bunch of electrodes that will measure electrical signals in different parts of your brain. Don't worry, it doesn't hurt, and I've tried it myself. I'm afraid it's a bit sticky though, because we have to use a special jelly to make sure that the signals get from your brain to the electrodes, and we shall have to shave your head too. But they say that lots of women find the shaved head look is very sexy, so perhaps it'll be all right with your fiancée Melanie. In my first section in the functional magnetic resonance imaging machine, I was asked simple questions. Is your name Michael? I thought about the tennis game. Do you have a fiancée? Tennis game. Is her name Bronwyn? I thought about the worm in the salad. Apart from it not being true, I don't find Bronwyn a very attractive name. Is your fiancée's name Melanie? I thought about tennis again, with Melanie in a very short tennis skirt. It seems that I passed this first set of tests with 100% accuracy. Dr. Bowen was ecstatic. You were the fourth person I'd been able to communicate with in this way, he told me. After a few sessions, I found that I could associate yes with tennis game and no with worm in the salad almost automatically. In fact, I even stopped thinking yes and no, and merely thought tennis and worm. And this did not in any way degrade the areas in which my brain lit up. All that's now several years in the past. During this time, I've become Mark's star performer, his top lab rat, you might say. Been so many advances I've been part of. Mark is now so famous that he travels all over the world to scientific conferences on the subject of communication with people who are in persistent comas and vegetative states. As I have said already, Mark had previously carried out the tennis and worm experiment with 3 other subjects. We moved on from yes and no questions to more complicated ideas. Mark explained that, for example, there are certain South American tribes whose concept of numbers is limited to 1, 2, and many. He trained me to correlate 1, 2, and many with easy, hard, and very hard. Thought processes that corresponded to these were catching a ball, hopping on one leg, and running a 5-kilometer race. Gradually, we were able to expand the number of types of questions I was able to answer. This was all very small stuff by comparison with what came later. The first major advance was that progress in computerization made it possible to dispense with the jelly-filled helmet. My brain waves could now be captured directly using sensors built right into the functional MRI machine. Mark then teamed up with researchers who were using computer assistants for people whose brains were fully functional, but who had lost various physical abilities. Computers allowed such persons to communicate by thinking words and phrases, whereupon those words could be transmitted electronically as printed words to a page, or could be formed into synthetic speech. I became the first person in a vegetative state who was able to express my thoughts in these two ways, and that's how I'm able today to communicate my story to you. Finally, I could convince the world that I was not brain dead, but very much alive. I've become something of a celebrity in my own right. Because of all the increasing miniaturization of the equipment, means that I can accompany Mark for at least some of his scientific presentations. The computerization of the problem has now been fully solved, although the life support equipment remains very inconvenient to move around. It was an enormous blow to Mark the day that I told him that I no longer wished to go on living. Why, he demanded, we've come so far, and it's all thanks to you. You're even a star in your own right now. Some days I think you could do the conference circuit without me at all. No, Mark, it's not that at all. You're right, it's been a wonderful ride. There's no way I would have wanted to miss it, but look at my life now. Computers have given me freedom to communicate freely, it's true, but I still can't even breathe on my own, let alone lead any sort of normal life. Melanie got fed up with waiting for me ages ago, and my mother's now dead. I don't have any friends besides you. Now, I do know I can count on you as a friend, I added, but I'm never likely to have anyone else. The people I interact with are either my caregivers who keep me alive with machines and stop me from getting bed sores, or the people who come and go up at my celebrity status and have me tell them in my synthetic voice what it means to be brain dead these days. Let's face it, Mark, the research problem is solved thanks to your hard work. Patients like me can now communicate and tell the world that we're not really dead. One of the best things to come out of this is that we don't now routinely cut up cognitively alive people and take out their organs without any benefit of anesthesia. We know now just how barbaric these things were only a few years ago. But right now I'm tired and I want it all to end. Assisted suicide, which is now called medical aid in dying, is now legal. It's legal for someone to help someone leave this world, provided that two doctors give their professional opinion the person concerned is of sound mind, and their medical condition is without hope of reversal. Well, my condition certainly isn't reversible. When it's all said and done, I'm still just a beating heart cadaver. Mark, will you do this for me? Will you help me leave this life? I'm ready. You saved me 10 years ago. Will you do it again? But you can't just leave me like that. The whole research program depends on you. None of the other BHCs are anything like as advanced as you are. Without you, we'll probably lose all the research funding. That would shut down the whole program. The lab techs would lose their jobs. I'm sorry, I can't possibly help you to commit suicide.